So if this is your first time this morning, you came on a good day, because we are starting a new series called The Giant. And I'm really excited about this series. It's actually one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible. And it's a story about Goliath. Sort of. I think it's also one of the most misunderstood stories in the Bible, and we'll figure that out as we go this month. But today, we're going to look at the giant himself, Goliath. We're going to ask the question, was he real? Was he really a giant? Was he just a tall guy, or was he really tall? Was he, what kind of warrior was he? And more importantly, what does he have to do with me today? Why am I wasting my time in church here talking about somebody who was alive, thousands and thousands of years ago? For myself, I am not facing down a 10-foot tall Philistine from the Iron Age. I don't know about you. I think we're not on that slide. We should be way back before that. There's one with like a big dust cloud right near the beginning. A dust cloud. That's the one. So this, it's not really me, but it's kind of me. The giant I'm facing right now is a basement renovation. We're putting in a bathroom and a bedroom in our basement. And I say we because I'm so thankful for my dad helping me out. And when I say helping, really, he's doing most of the work and I'm helping him. But a few weeks ago, we were realizing that to put in the shower, we need to put in, a P-trap under the drain. And unless we want the shower to be, way off the floor, we have to actually dig into the concrete, something we were hoping not to do. And so we got the angle grinder out, and it worked beautifully. I mean, it just started chewing through the cement. But the problem was dust clouds just filled not just the room, but the entire house. I was not very popular with my spouse that day, and we hung a bunch of drapes and stuff like that to try and keep the mess contained. But it got to the point where I couldn't even see what I was doing. I was just sitting there grinding away, hoping for the best, because I couldn't see. It was just clouds. And I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure inhaling a bunch of concrete dust probably isn't good for you either. So I had one of these masks on. I don't know if you've seen these masks. They're not as effective as you might hope. I was definitely coughing out all kinds of nasty stuff later on that day. But that's my giant right now. I mean, when I get home, I'm mudding drywall and sanding it and making a big mess and trying to figure out what's next. And my dad's over there all the time, and he's doing work, and it's great for him to do that. But that's my giant. You might have a different kind of giant in your life. What's your biggest concern right now? Whatever comes to mind, that's probably your giant. For someone right now, it might be saving up for university, or even trying to decide which university to go to. You might be saving up for your retirement, or buying a house, or some other financial issue. Maybe you're not trying to save, you're trying to pay off something you've made a bad financial choice on. For some of you, it might be a relationship. You're in a marriage that's struggling right now, and that's the giant. Or maybe you're fighting with your kids all the time, or fighting with your parents all the time, and that's the giant that you're dealing with. Maybe it's work related, and you're trying to figure out, what am I going to do with my future? Maybe you don't like the job you're in, or maybe you feel like it's a dead end. Maybe you want to try and get ahead, but you can't. There's someone holding you down. I don't know what your situation is, but there's a giant in your life. It's something that is in your way. Sometimes, maybe for some of us, it might be a physical concern. Maybe your doctor gave you really bad news, or maybe a loved one, or something like that. Whatever it is, when you're facing down an issue, it feels like facing down a giant that's standing in your way. And when you're facing down a giant that stands in your way, he is all you can see. So we're going to look at this passage. And I'm not doing the entire chapter today. It's not a super long chapter, but I decided I wanted to break it up and do this over a few weeks. So 1 Samuel chapter 17, if you have a Bible with you, you can open it to that. I'll be reading from the New Living Translation today, but the story is the same no matter which translation you use. Starting in verse 1. It says, "The Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Soka in Judah and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim." I think we have a slide for this. Are we? Okay. No problem. No, okay. Sometimes we have trouble with our program when we put them in and they go all weird order and stuff like that. So he'll figure it out. There we go. So I think this is actually more like a scene from Braveheart, but it gives you the sort of idea. The Philistines mustered their army for battle and camped between Soka in Judah and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. Saul countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and the Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with a valley between them. And so, the one army brought all its people and they mustered it in this one area, and then they spread out their battle lines, and then the Israelites did the same on the opposite side of this valley. And it may have actually been like they were all on the same side of a hill with a valley in between them. That's kind of the idea. It may have been even the same mountain, but there was like two heights and a valley in between them. And they're on opposite sides. They're camping out. Battle's coming. They know they're getting ready to go to war. The valley of Elah was like the natural point of entry from the Philistine homeland. So if the Philistines wanted to invade Saul's kingdom, this was the place to go. And so this was like one of those key battles. Like whoever wins this battle is going to have a major difference in the war going forward. If the Philistines win, Saul's going to have a real hard time. If Saul wins, the Philistines will have to come back and try and fight another day. I remember before I played on the football team, I was at a high school that we had what was called the night game. And there was two schools in the same town. It would be sort of like if Fellows and Bishop had a football team. Does Valor have a football team? Anyone know? Doesn't really matter. No one's playing football right now anyway because of COVID. But in our town, we had the two schools. We had the Warriors and we had the Raiders. And once a year they would meet for the night game. It was a neutral field with lights, and it was the closest we ever came to feeling like we played in the NFL. And it was the highlight of our football season. And so before I was actually on the team, I went and watched the game, and at halftime, I don't know if someone planned this ahead of time or how this happened, but all the students that were watching the game came out onto the field and stood face to face. We lined up. It was like a weird like almost like Braveheart movie scene. We're lining up, probably this far away from each other, and we were just all shouting the name of our team. Warriors, Raiders, Warriors, Raiders. And I got to the point where I was like, this is like a powder keg about to go off. Like, all it takes is for one person to throw something, or to step forward, or run at each other, and there's gonna be like a big brawl here. Like, when you think about it now, it's so stupid. Like, who cares? It's a football game. But at the time, it just felt like everyone was amped up and ready to go and ready to fight. And that's probably the closest I will ever come to experiencing what was going on between the Philistines and the Israelites. Just these two armies on either side of a field, getting ready to fight. And I know a lot of you are soldiers. You'll probably never experience anything like this. I don't want to pretend I know what your job is like or anything like that, but I'm guessing you don't face off on a field each other, standing there yelling at each other. I'm guessing that doesn't happen anymore with the kind of weapons we have these days. But this is what was going on there. And so you were trying to face down your opponent. You were trying to scare them. You were trying to intimidate them. The thing is, this should never have happened. This should have never happened. It tells us that the Philistines mustered their army for battle and camped between Soka in Judah and Azekah at Ephes Dammim. Now, this translation doesn't do a great job of explaining it. Soka in Judah. Another translation I read said in Soka belonging to Judah. So what's happening here is the Philistines are camping out, or starting their campaign in a town that actually belongs to Israel. They're basically being big bullies here, but they should not have done. This whole scene should never have happened. Joshua chapter 13. Joshua tells a story of the Israelites coming into the promised land, and God said, I'm giving you this land as the promised land for you and your people, and anyone who's there, get them out of the way. And what's even more than that, he says, I myself will drive these people out of the land ahead of the Israelites. So Joshua and his army, all they had to do was put their faith in God enough to say, if we go, he's going to go before us. We're going to win every battle because God's going to win the battle for us. But what we find out is that they didn't go all the way. They went in far enough to get comfortable, but they didn't go all the way to get rid of every enemy. And so now, hundreds of years later, Saul is dealing with the issue of having this army on his doorstep in a town that belongs to his people that should not have even been there. The enemy should not even have existed at this point. Verse 4 says, Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. Some translations say a scimitar, some kind of a sword. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and as thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor-bearer walked ahead of him, carrying a shield. The word Goliath means splendor, and I can just imagine what he must have looked like. Probably had his stuff all shined up for this occasion. The sun beating down on him, and he's just appearing like this shiny mass of man, like a mountain. So let's talk about him. My translation says he was over 9 feet tall. The traditional term for his height was, 6 cubits and a span. And everyone knows what a cubit is, right? So I don't need to go into that. We'll talk about cubit in a second. But when you come to this chapter, you have to ask yourself, okay, was he really 9 feet tall? Like, is it possible that anyone could be 9 feet tall? Or over 9 feet tall? Some people think it's actually bigger than that, but let's just go with this translation here and say he was over 9 feet tall. Is that even humanly possible? Well, I'm a huge basketball fan. And the tallest basketball player to ever play was a guy in the NBA, was a guy named George Mirasan. He was 7'7". I used to get basketball magazines, and there was a picture of him, in the office changing the light bulbs, not on a ladder like that, just standing and doing it. And everyone looked like, just looked short compared to him. NBA players who everyone else looks at and think they're huge, everyone looks short compared to him. Manute Bol was one of the second tallest player, and a few of them were actually 7'6". But I've got this picture of him next to Muggsy Bogues, who was the shortest player. And the two of them played on the same team at the same time. And there's this amazing picture you see. You just see the height difference between them. Maybe a better person to think about if you follow sports at all would be Shaquille O'Neal. He's like 7'1", but he's big. Like he's what I imagine Goliath would look like. But then you add 2 feet to him, and you start to wonder: is that even possible? Robert Wadlow, reportedly the tallest man who ever lived, at least that we have actual records, recent record of. He lived in the 40s. He was 8 feet 11. He was 8 feet 11 inches tall. He died at the age of 22, and he was still growing. And this was less than 100 years ago. And so I feel like we could trust that height. Apparently John Middleton from the turn of the 17th century was 9'3". And there's all kinds of history and writings that if you think you can trust writings from that day, and I think we can, there was somebody who lived 9'3" in England. I think it's possible that he was as tall as the Bible says he was. So the Bible says that he was 6 cubits. So let's talk about a cubit. What is a cubit? A cubit is the length from a person's elbow to the tip of their finger. Now, does anyone know the problem with that? Whose arm are we talking about? Right? Like, if you look at a little kid, their cubit is going to be shorter than my cubit. Which brings us to the Salom Aqueduct. Salom Aqueduct is a tunnel that was built in the age of Hezekiah. Not too long after the chapter that we're talking about here. And there's an inscription about the aqueduct, the tunnel, that states that it was 1,200 cubits long. Now the thing is, they've found this tunnel, and they know where it is. They can measure the distance of it in modern day language. So you take the 1,200 cubits and you measure out the tunnel, which is 1,750 feet. It gives you the length of an Old Testament cubit. When you do the math, it turns out to 17 and a half inches from your elbow to your fingertip. Now, if you, again, do the math, 6 cubits plus a span, it brings you out to probably over 9 feet. 6 cubits is 8 feet 8 inches. So however long a span is, it adds to it. We're putting Goliath at 9 feet tall. And I think it's probably a trustworthy translation if you can believe everything else that we've talked about here. I don't see any reason to think that he couldn't be 9 feet tall. Let's talk more about giants. Again, we're going to go to a different passage from the Old Testament. Numbers chapter 13. This is after the Israelites had gone in to the Promised Land. And the first time, they went to scout it out. And they came back and they gave a report. And this is what they said. They said, "We even saw giants living there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers." And that's what they thought too. So let's move forward a little bit. Joshua, again, chapter 11, talking about the conquest. So the first time they went in, they saw these giants, it scared them away. They wandered in the desert for 40 years. Finally, Joshua led them into the Promised Land. So let's talk about these descendants of Anak. Joshua chapter 11. It says, "During this period, Joshua destroyed all the descendants of Anak who lived in the hill country of Hebron, Debir, Anab, and the entire hill country of Judah and Israel. He killed them all and completely destroyed their towns. None of the descendants of Anak were left in the land of Israel, though some still remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod." Let's go back to Goliath. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath. So you've got these giants who are known to the people, completely destroyed, except for a few who lived in the hometown of this guy named Goliath, who was probably a descendant of Anak. So you put all this together and you realize that there's good evidence for the fact that this guy was as tall as we think he is. Some people say, well, he was just, everyone else was short and he was like my height, or maybe like Shaq's height or something like that, but he wasn't. I don't see any reason to think that he wasn't as tall as the Bible tells us he is. And then you look at it, the stuff he wore, 125 pounds of mail, all the 15 pounds of a spear, all the rest of the stuff that he's carrying with him. Some people suggested that what he was carrying was up to 200 pounds of armor. Now, help me out, those of you who have done rucksack marches. How much weight do you carry? This is the part where you interact. 90 pounds is really heavy. So if this guy's carrying 200 pounds, you have to think maybe there's something kind of significant and special about him. So let's go on. Verse 8, "Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across the Israelites." So again, you've got this guy whose name means splendor, and he stands on this battlefield in front of all these other troops. The armies are faced off against each other. He's probably shining because of all of the stuff he's wearing. He's gigantic, and he's just taunting the Israelites. "Why are you coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only servants of Saul." So the word champion here, it means, the actual translation of the word is kind of like middleman, or one who stands in the middle. And what he's saying to them, he's saying, why are you all coming up to fight? I'm the Philistine champion. You're only servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. Let's go in the middle. Let's go between the two armies. You don't all need to fight. Just one-on-one. Let's have a little battle here. And I've got this picture of Troy up here. For anyone who's seen the movie, this is kind of what happens in the movie Troy. Hector goes against Achilles, the dreamy Brad Pitt. And they have this single warfare to try to, decide the battle, so that we don't all need to fight and die. What are your odds if you go into this battle that something, even if you're a great warrior, who knows what's going to happen to the guy beside you, and then you get hit in the back or something like that. Just some random thing might happen, and you might die. So let's not do all that. You're already a servant of Saul. What difference does it make if you're a slave to us? Your life is probably not going to change at all. Why risk your life fighting this huge army? By the way, I'm the head of it. When really, just send one guy, we'll determine the battle. If you guys win, we'll be your slaves. If we win, you'll be our slaves. What difference does it make? Let's not all fight and die. he's saying, send me a man, but he's really saying, send me a specific man. He names him. He says, you're only the servants of Saul. Choose one man, come down here and fight me. If he kills me, we'll be your slaves. I kill him, you'll be our slaves. But I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me. He is calling Saul out. He's calling Saul a chicken. See, Goliath, 9 feet tall. He's the giant of his team, and he's coming out to call people out. And he's saying, I want you to send your giant to fight me. And who was the Israelites' giant? It was Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2. This is introduction to Saul. The Bible telling us who he is. Saul was the most handsome man in Israel. He was the Brad Pitt of their team. I don't know if I'm dating myself with Brad Pitt, whoever it is now, some other Brad. Head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the land. So he was like, if you look for somebody to be, who's the king? He was straight out of central casting. He was handsome, he was tall, he looked the part of the king. So imagine being an Israelite soldier. And their giant comes out, and you're waiting for your giant to step out and fight him. He's tall. You're taller than all of us. You're our warrior. You're our king. Go fight the guy. Save us. We don't want to be slaves. We're already your servants, but go do your job, Saul. And Saul is nowhere to be seen. And so Goliath is out there just taunting them. And he says, I defy you. And really, it's kind of like saying, you're all chickens, especially your king. That's the guy you follow, and he won't even come out and fight me? Now Saul and the Israelites, when they heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. I kind of understand. I mean, if I had to face off against a 9-foot tall guy carrying 200 pounds of armor, I would probably be terrified as well. But Saul should not have been. See, Saul was recognized as king after defeating a bully. There was somebody else who came into their area, and he'd already been anointed king, but not everyone was sort of on board with him. And when Saul heard what was happening to his people, he got angry. He got justifiably angry. And so he went to their rescue, and he fought, and he defeated the enemy, and everyone, cheering him on. And what he said was, today, the Lord has rescued Israel. Not today, Saul has rescued Israel. He's not saying, recognize me as your king because I came to the... No, he's saying, today the Lord has rescued Israel. But after a little while being king, after some battles, Saul started to care more about what other people thought than what God thought. He chose to trust in himself rather than in God. And so Goliath stands before the army of Israel, and Saul is nowhere to be seen because he stopped trusting in God. So Saul's out there. There's something called the hearts and minds. You guys probably know better than I do. When you go into battle, you want to try to capture the hearts and minds of the enemy. Try to make them already defeated before you go to war. And that's what's happening right here. Goliath is out there challenging the enemy, and they're already defeated. Even if they do, muster up the courage to go to battle, they're going to be fighting scared. And for 40 days, we're going to go to verse 16 here. For 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israelite army and challenged them. Now, one of the commentaries I read said there's something specific here about the morning and evening. And what he was saying was that Goliath was out there challenging them every time they would pray. There's something something called the Shema, which is what Israelites would do morning and evening. They would pray the same text, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 9. Listen. That's what the word Shema means, listen. It says, listen, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. And you must commit yourself wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home, when you're on the road, when you're going to bed, when you're getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them to your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. God's telling them, I don't want you to forget that I'm with you. The Lord your God, the Lord is one, and you must love the Lord your God. He's with you, you're with him, we're a team. And if you go, I will go before you, and I will defeat your enemy. And every time they got together to pray this prayer, Goliath would come out and shout them down. And he would call them chickens, and he would remind them, he would not let them remind themselves that God was with them. So when you're facing a giant that stands in your way, the giant's all you can see. But history has shown us that the real giant is God, and he's passionate about saving you. This is something that Saul forgot. It's something that Israel forgot. God said, if you go, I'm going to go before you. I'm going to defeat your enemies. And in the time of Joshua, they didn't go far enough. And by the time Saul is in this place, he has forgotten that the Lord is the one who saves Israel. And the Israelite army is looking at Goliath, and they're looking at Saul when they should be looking at Goliath and looking at God and realizing that God is the real giant of the story. And they have nothing to fear because he's on their side. He is passionate about saving them. So what does that have to do with us today? Well, we all have a giant. We all have something facing us down. It may be something as small as a bathroom renovation. It may be something as huge as cancer. But rather than focusing on the giant that stands in your way, put your faith in the God who wants to save you. Rather than focusing on the giant that stands in your way, put your faith in the giant who wants to save you. See, there's a bigger issue here than a basement renovation or financial problems or marital problems or anything else that's going on. No matter what your giant is, there's a bigger giant beyond that. It's the giant of eternity. There's a giant who wants to save you, and he gave his son to rescue you from an eternity without him. And that's the biggest giant any of us could face. And that's how passionate God is about saving you, that he sent his son. And when we eat this bread, when we drink this juice of communion, we declare him to be our Savior. And if you weren't at a place to do that this morning, I understand. No one's judging anybody. We're not looking to see who's doing it and who's not. But what I'd say to you is, if you're not at a place where you can declare Jesus as your Lord and Savior, please come talk to me, because I want to get you there. I want to help convince you to get there. It's not me that does anything. It'll be God. But I want to have that conversation with you and see, what is it that's holding you back? And if it is some other kind of giant, don't let that giant stand in your way. Put your eyes on the only giant who can save you. Whatever giant you're facing now is all you can see, and it's keeping you from looking at the Lord your God, the only one who can save you. And when that happens, I want us to think of our verse for this month. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. When I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. I'm going to ask the prayer team to come up.